Alright guys, so I wanted to make a video about the video features of the Fuji X-T200. I'm sad to say that the everyday dad beat me to the punch. That's okay. He makes a lot of great videos. I highly recommend it. I love the everyday dad. You should go check out his video. But I have a slightly different take, and so I felt that it was still worthwhile for me to make this video. So we're going to talk about the video features. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start showing you some clips of the image stabilization out of the Fuji X-T200. We're going to show you a clip showing just the optical image stabilization, followed by digital image stabilization, and then finally using the digital gimbal feature. So unlike Everyday Dad, the clips that he showed was just him standing, holding the camera out in like a vlogging selfie style, whereas I actually go for a walk, and I'll show you some clips of that. So we're going to start with that, we're going to talk about what my findings are, and then I'm going to show you some 120 FPS slow-mo clip that I recorded using this. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some other gripes that I have with the video features on this camera, and then we'll summarize it all at the end. All right, so first things first, I'm going to show you the clips. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is the X-T200 with the kit 15 to 45, 3.5 to 5.6 lens here. It's an image, or it's an optical image stabilized lens. And so I'm going to play you the clip of me walking with that, just the optical image stabilization. So what you can see is that, so I'm walking on a fairly rocky incline path. It's not like a flat sidewalk type of trail, and it's not great. Optical image stabilization is not great. I would say on the same sort of I got interrupted there. Sorry, I kind of lost track of where I was. But yeah, if you look at the optical image stabilization only for the Fuji X-T200, I don't find it's much better than a Sony APS-C camera or a Sony full-frame camera. That is to say, stabilization while walking is not great. I think if you're just standing in place and filming yourself handheld, it's okay, it's acceptable, but that could be said of even Sony cameras that are notoriously bad at stabilization. But when you're walking, as you can see in this clip, it doesn't work very well. So next we're going to talk about digital image stabilization. So here's the clip of digital image stabilization. In my opinion, I don't feel like the stabilization is all that great either. You can see, you can also see that the autofocus is not working great, but we'll talk about that later. But you can see that the stabilization is still not great. It's wobbling a lot, and then there's definitely some distortion. You can see in the background behind me. And so for the possible almost negligible amount of additional stabilization, I don't think that that's worth the warping artifacts that you're seeing in the background. The next thing, the next clip I'm going to show you is with the digital gimbal turned on. So here you go. Obviously the immediate first thing you'll notice is that it crops way in. I would say it's about a 2-time crop, okay? But the image stabilization is just clearly much better. And I would say that this level of stabilization is on the order of Panasonic cameras. You can see the autofocus is struggling like crazy right now. It's not locking on my face. But again, we'll talk about autofocus a little bit later. But you can see that the image stabilization is much better with digital gimbal. I will say, however, that digital gimbal is not all sunshine and rainbows, because you do see some artifacts with it. And I think what happens is that for the digital gimbal mode, the camera crops way in, okay? And that crop will float around the frame, okay, in order to keep things stable. However, if that crop eventually drifts close enough to the edge of the frame where it can no longer um, float and keep things stable, it'll do these sort of um, quick pans, quick unnatural pans to bring that crop back into the center. And so you'll notice that in this clip, and I'll try and show it to you. You'll see that things are floating around pretty nicely and it's pretty stable, but at some point you're going to see the whole crop shift fairly quickly and then unnaturally. So that is a little bit of an artifact that you see with the digital gimbal modes that a lot of other review videos are complaining about, but I don't think very many people are showing it or even explicitly describing what those artifacts are. But anyway, that's what I'm seeing. To me, though, I think that the degree of stabilization is good enough that I would use it. The problem is that that crop is far too heavy for this lens, the 15-45 lens, for me to use it in a selfie mode. And so at the end of the day, this camera kit, with the kit lens, with that digital gimbal, is still not, I think, usable for selfie style vlogging. What I wish Fuji would do is I wish that they would just show on the screen a red box which tells you where the crop is going to be, but still show you the whole frame, what the sensor is seeing. Because that way we can see how that red box is floating around, and when it drifts close to the edge of the frame, we can take steps to correct and shift that crop back by turning the camera a little bit, shift it back towards center in a less unnatural way and in a more natural way, or it allows us to pause our talking or whatever, so that we can crop out that quick pan later in post. So anyway, this is a suggestion for Fuji. I doubt that they're going to see this video, but if you are going to give us a firmware update, maybe do that. Maybe for the digital gimbal, put a red square around to show us where the crop is, and let us see how it's floating to keep things stable. So we, the users in front of the camera, are these one-man crew type videos. We can try and keep that crop in the center, so there's no unnatural pans. The final clip that I want to show you here is the 120 FPS slow-mo. So for this clip, it's more just to show you the image quality. I think it looks fine. Sometimes for 120 FPS slow-mo, you do notice a very significant decrease in image quality. For example, on my Sony a6400, I didn't notice an obvious deterioration here for the Fuji X-T200. But yeah, there you go. And I will point out that for this clip, I used optical image stabilization only. So I turned off digital image stabilization, and obviously digital gimbal was not on. I don't think you can have it on. So that is that. One of the things you'll notice in that clip also was that the autofocus was off, and I'm going to talk about that too. Okay, so now I want to talk about some of my other gripes with regards to video for the Fuji X-T200. Let's start with autofocus. So one of my biggest gripes about autofocus is that if you turn this into selfie mode, it automatically goes to face and eye detection, which is okay. I don't hate that. My problem is that they don't give you the option to turn off face and eye detection in this sort of selfie mode. Again, I don't hate that, but the problem is that you can't do auto exposure lock when you have face and eye detection on for some reason. This is such a weird limitation that Fuji implemented, and hopefully they can turn it off in a future firmware update. Because that is the case even when not in selfie mode. If you have it on regular mode and you have face and eye detection autofocus on, you cannot do auto exposure lock. Now you might be saying, well, Fuji cameras are known for all these physical dials, so you can just dial in the setting that you want, and that's a type of auto exposure lock. But that's not the point of auto exposure lock. The point of auto exposure lock is that it allows you to very quickly and effortlessly nail the right exposure and then just lock it. You shouldn't have to play with these dials to find the correct exposure. And what's more, you can't call me lazy for wanting that, because the Fuji X-T200 actually does allow you to do auto exposure lock. You just have to turn off face and eye detection autofocus. In just sort of regular autofocus modes, you can assign one of these custom buttons to do auto exposure lock. But like I said, when you flip the screen around into the selfie mode, it only does face and eye detection autofocus, which means you can't do auto exposure lock. Another thing that I noticed with the autofocus has to do with slow-mo. So as you saw in that previous clip, when I was doing slow-mo, the auto exposure was struggling. And that is because in slow-mo mode, the X-T200 does not have continuous autofocus, which is a bit of a weird limitation. However, I don't hate it, because it still does allow you to do autofocus single, right? So you can still have some autofocus, it's just not continuous. And what's more, it does allow you to touch the screen to set your autofocus single. So I think it's an okay limitation, and I think it's an adequate workaround. All right, so the other gripe I have with this camera, I wrote auto exposure lock, but I feel like I kind of covered that already. You are able to set one of these custom buttons as auto exposure lock, but you can't do that with face and eye detection autofocus, which I think is just such a weird limitation, and I wish Fuji would get rid of that. Another thing that is absent is white balance lock. So I feel like that is one of the most important things that I would lock. You know, auto exposure lock, if I didn't have that, I don't hate it, but not being able to lock white balance is one of the worst things, right? I was so happy when I found out how to do it on my A6400 that I made a video about it. And similarly, one of my biggest gripes about filming on an iPhone is that there is no auto white balance lock. I mean, I think you can lock auto white balance, but you would have to lock everything else along with it, including auto exposure and autofocus. I think the exception is when you're using the front-facing selfie camera. For that camera, I don't think you can lock autofocus. So I think it's okay. It's workable when you're using the selfie camera. Of course, the image quality is worse with the selfie camera on an iPhone, but at least you can lock out auto exposure and white balance. But for the back camera, the fact that you can't lock white balance without also locking auto exposure and autofocus is a real pain about shooting on an iPhone. So that's a huge miss. Again, I wish Fuji can fix that in a firmware update. And finally, one other thing I want to talk about is the image tweaks. Okay, so obviously the Fuji X-T200 does not include an Eterna profile, which I absolutely love. And it is just such a shame that they did not include that in this camera. It is very clearly a software thing and would be easy to implement, but they have chosen not to include it in lower end cameras. But that said, I think that's okay, and you know, the existing profiles are good enough that I'm fine to work with it. However, what is less acceptable is the fact that they also turn off all image tweaks. You know, when you shoot stills, you can set whatever profile you like, but you're also allowed to tweak highlight and shadow tone, as well as sharpening. Okay, and but as you can see on this menu, okay, in video mode, they do not allow you to tweak the shadow, highlight, or details. In fact, they hardly let you tweak anything at all. So that's another gripe I have with the videos, or the video features of the Fuji X-T200. All right, so that brings us to the end. So just to summarize, I think the Fuji X-T200 is a great beginner camera. I think it is far more aimed at stills. And while I think it is capable of being an excellent video camera, as evidenced by the fact that they've included a digital gimbal feature, there are some very weird limitations that kind of discourages me from using it. I think a lot of it can be fixed via software updates or firmware updates, so I really hope Fuji does change this stuff. I'm not holding my breath though, because it feels like Fuji is doing what other cameras are doing, which is protecting their higher end cameras. Anyway, here's hoping. But you know, I think for the average user who is just getting into video, I think they'll have a decent time with the camera. But as soon as they start, you know, wanting to increase their production value or improve their video quality, they're going to immediately hit these walls, and it's just too bad. So anyway, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.